Not yet.
Not yet, my colleague says. But what we are prepared to do, having consulted each other, is that if you want to have some books, one or more, you could certainly take them with you, and we trust you to send us the amount of euros, not rubles, euros or dollars, as soon as it's possible for you to do so. Okay, so take copies that you want and that you promise to read, because we radicals cannot afford to be intellectually lazy. We know that. So take whatever you want, and Nathan will take down your coordinates and make sure that you will walk away with a certain sum of money that you will owe, and you will pay it as soon as you possibly can. Okay? Good. Having said all that, I want now to introduce to you who's going to participate in the panel. It will be Malin, it will be Svante, it will be Haben, and it will be Theo.
Yep.
And each one of these exceptional people are going to start the panel with 2 or 3 minutes. Because one of the essential elements of the democratic process and the public debate is self-discipline and conciseness. So if we don't manage to master that skill, we're in trouble as individuals and as a movement. So each person is going to be invited to give his commentary, his analysis, her perspective for the future, replying to the question, how do we move forward, in 2 or 3 minutes. The second part is that 4 panelists are then going to comment on each other's contribution for another body of time, saying, I don't agree with you, or I do agree with Svante, and I will build on it by adding the following, kind of a dialogue between the 4 of them. And then the third part is that each one of them is going to be invited to then go on to give a synthetic, concise 2 or 3 concluding statement on their part. The fourth part is we open it up to the ecclesia, to the assembly. And we invite your participation to answer the question, how do we move forward? And we will carry that on. It could be statements on your part. It could be exchanges with the 4 panelists. It could be in a form that is original to you. You may want to sing a song or hang from the wall. I don't know. You use the best way that you think best. And then we will decide that we will wrap it up. We may do something or other that is different. But again, the flow of the discussion, the flow of the debate is really in our collective hands. So I'm open to the momentum that we will set in the process. But I repeat, let's try to pull things together. Let's pop, one of the great difficulties of constructing a movement is fragmentation at the individual level and amongst groups of people. So let's see how it unfolds, shall we? And I will begin with my dear comrade to my left, Malin, who came all the way from Sweden to come here to Thessaloniki. This is actually the 4th TRISE conference that she came to, right?
Yes.
A real veteran. And I had to persuade her gently to make it this time, because like all of us, purse is not bottomless and has a limited number of euros in it. So, but she did, and we're very thankful for for her being here and to listen to her on the basis of her experience and knowledge. Malin, please.
Thank you. All right, let me see. Okay, so I'll try to keep track of myself. Let me do that. Sorry, I'll do it the other way. Cool. All right. All right. So how do we move forward? How can we work on this? As we said, I really can continue and building on what has been said just lately in last session. It's really good, and I think really we do need to do the research, practice, evaluate, research, practice, and do it all over again, because there's no perfect way of doing this, because we are working in a world which is, you know how this is really dirty business in this world, so we need to find a way of what can move us forward, you know? Trying our way, but I will, in short of time, so I will try to be moving on to concrete things to as well, line up some things that I think of. As been pointed out in the last session, is the building movement and building a power base. And I see from that, there's different things in that. It's both community organizing, community building, and working with social movements, like strong social movements. Because we need to involve a lot of people to make this move. We can't create these institutions without being people that actually are demanding and creating them. Otherwise, we will have assemblies where no one comes to the assembly because someone else can do it. We need to be us people that want to demand and create this, no? So be a lot of people that want this. And the power base as well is the power is built up. Are a lot of people? That is a power base. And I think, so there's different things of this. I don't have it completely structured, they will go into each other. So one thing when building these movements and community organizing is both working with issues, democratization, and building new institutions, new ways of doing politics and economics. So if you're working with issues of environment, you always bring in the issue of power and democratization. Like, how can we create to demand, while you demanding the issue of right to water, you're demanding the right to decide over water, no? And as well, you're demanding that we need new ways of deciding over water. We want a new political system, and we want a new way, economical system as well, a democratization over resources. Yeah? So you have that with you in all your struggles, and I think that is something that unites as well a lot of these different struggles, that you can work with all these different issues of refugees, environment, gender, etc. And as well when you're working in the local community, because it's both about the issues that can be wider issues, but as well it's in the community. Now we're like locally, your neighbors, and the same applies to there. Like, you, the people that live in your community, you have all these problems and wishes you want to bring up, and as well you want to, you have the right to decide over it, right? So I think in a democratization, exactly, it's quick. Time is fast, that's what they say. And I think we have, we can say more later on, but we have the community organizing. We have a lot to learn from how to work in community organizing. So that's something I need to study more into, the tools of community organizing, and as well strategies of how to win fights. No, there's a lot of power analysis of how to work to win fights. And when we work with democratization, there's we have a lot of concrete things we can work with, participatory budget. We can work with local development plans, like working in a community, what do we want to change and what proposals to put forward. And we have all these different things that people brought up, like the commons, the community land trust, cooperatives. We have to work on all this together. And I think, can I go on or should I?
Well, you almost have 3 minutes. You have 30 seconds more to go.
Great. So I'll just mention the last things, I think, so the building up the solidarity economy as well. And then you're looking to seize local power now. So as we see, you can both stand in for local elections and through the institutions, you can move the power. Or you can see other strategies like Massa Critica in Neapolis, and you can do this like parallel, having all the like social movements being strongly connected and demanding to the local institutions. And I think something that we haven't brought up so much is the media, actually, because we really need to democratize media, because that's a really big problem. So I think we need to look into more how we do that. And the latest remark, I think, will really all the time we need to look into equality in what we are working, because we have all this unequal power relations. So while we are building all this movement, we need to look into this intersectionality of hierarchies now. So we have gender, we have race, and we have sexuality, etc. And if we don't do that, like being representative movement, we will fail in working on it.
Good.
Yeah.
Right. That is called an exercise in self-discipline. You know, Malin went over by a half a minute, but we're getting there. It's an acquired skill, believe me, to be concise. And our next speaker is Svante.
Okay. Hello. Wow, that was a lot. Okay, I will time myself here also see how I manage. How to approach this then? I thought I could shortly just tell my story, how this all started for me. This journey, how I got approached to or like encountered social ecology. It was like some 20 years ago. I was a young anarchist, also involved in a youth environmental organization, and a friend of mine asked if I couldn't join him to this summer course on social ecology at the Institute of Social Ecology in Vermont, US. And I went there. I was quite new to these ideas, but it was a quite life-changing experiences for me. And when we came back, we also got contacts with some. I lived in Sweden. We got contact with some people in Norway, and we quite soon after this started to build an organization that lasted for a couple of years, 5-6 years or something, and you could see many things that we didn't do well or didn't succeed in, but I want to highlight 2 things that I think we did right, that I think still count for future activities. And the first thing was that we already from the start founded the organization as a political organization that had explicit political ambition, that we wanted to struggle for political power, political change, with a social ecology approach. But we, more than emphasize social ecology, we use the term communalism in Sweden to emphasize this approach of looking for the how to democratize the city and how to engage citizens in popular assemblies and recreate the political structure. The other thing we did right was something that has been brought up a lot already, but that we also focused very much on education. We had really a lot of study groups that then went much deeper into philosophy and looked. We did a lot of reading on social ecology and dialectical naturalism and so forth. But I think this mix of political outreach that's focused on practice and the politics, combined with the educational approach that tries to ground this practice in theory is crucial for any movement that wants to be successful. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, sir.
This feels a bit like a TV contest. I'm going to try to be provocative. I've been hearing we should try to do this, we should try to do the other thing. I think that we should try to find out who we are. It's if it's implicit that there is a movement right now and we are here to decide where the movement is going. I think that there is no coherent movement right now, there's no coherent actor. We had our moments of opportunity some time ago. We had some times where the ideas discussed in this room were widespread, but they're not anymore. They have been tried. So it's a time to reflect on our successes, but especially reflect on our failures, and especially in the issue of institutional change that we approached after the first mobilization, everything 2 or 3 years after that, everything was about institutions, either a state council like in Greece, etc., or a municipal power like in Spain. I think that we are not ready to approach power because we lack a coherent theory of power. So in terms of theory, we should understand what power is. We have a simplistic idea that we come to power and then we implement our policy and we create a better world. We can see now in Barcelona and in Spain and many other places that power is not something that you capture through elections. It's a very complex thing that has many different components. You might be able to capture and control some of them, but you're always in a very, very complex environment, which has a specific mission, which is to reproduce capital and the capitalist society in which we live. And in order to not become a component of power, we have to develop a theory of power. It's a very serious theoretical lack right now. So what I'm proposing is back to the grassroots, back to the level of the grassroots and the organization of the community. Learn from our internal conflicts, learn to control the power within our movements, and create new blueprints of operation that can become relevant in a new moment of mobilization that is definitely coming, because things are not linear. If we're demobilized now, doesn't mean that things are going to be like that in 5 or 10 years from now. And work on 3 very important issues from the bottom up, not from aiming to change it from the institutions. Sustainability of our movements. Okay, we create a very good movement that has great aims and goals, but how can it go forward? So we are talking about material autonomy and material sustainability. We have to be able to sustain ourselves. Scale. We might be organizing perfectly on this scale and around our common resource, but when we go on a higher scale in society, we face totally new challenges that we haven't thought from our first level. And third, coordination. How do we create institutions that can come to common conclusions and decisions without being representative, without excluding, etc. So back to the beginning, I was going to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Pavel.
Yeah. Now I think I can safely talk about a we, because I come from a mass movement who has been transforming itself over 45 years. So over the course of 45 years, and has been doing this together with the grassroots. From, as I explained in my speech, from the point of non-existence, it actually proposes a non-state alternative. Let me just try to sum it up in a few points. There's nothing magical, of course, that is going on here. That's why I went through great detail. One is, your heart needs to be in it. You need to believe what you're doing. This is so important, because when you do believe what you're doing, And when you know that there is nothing else that you'd like to do, then your head is going to follow this, you know. So I think this is very important. And you need to question, before you question capitalism, which we are doing it in very detail anyway, question yourself and your society. Öcalan was saying that over the years, he has been struggling with the Kurdish society 99%, and only 1% with the Turkish state, or, you know, capitalism in general. So it's important that you make the change within you, first of all. So that's what the Kurdish revolutionaries have been doing. The second one is you need to have a plausible story that the masses are going to believe. Not just you, but the people out there has to believe you as well. And this is what's been lacking overall. Nobody's going to the people. The fascists are going, the right wing are going, you know, because the moment is now, not only for Rojava, but for the US. You know, the US doesn't have to choose between Hillary or Trump. There can be a third choice. And, you know, and I think, but what we are not doing, and I have to quote from Öcalan again, and he says, you know, why are people still believing in religions? Because they have a plausible storyline. The world was made like this is what happened, and you have a vision of life, you know. So what we need to do also, have a plausible theory and a vision of future. And this is why women are smiling in Rojava and in Bakur, you know, in Kurdistan, with arms in their hands. It's not because they like to kill or fight, it's because they are freeing themselves. This is why they are so happy. You know, it's not the act of war, but act of liberation. And I have to tell you, it can't be part-time, you know. I'll go on with my life. Okay, I'll come once in a while to meetings and I'll do this, I'll do that. It doesn't work like that. It can't be part-time. And I want to emphasize it, it can't be elitist, you know. Like most of the movements are either from one town, or they are students, or they are intellectuals, or they are I don't know what. But in the form of Kurdish Freedom Movement, PKK, you can find all classes, you know, everyone in there. But they are convinced that this is the way actually to get rid of the chains that tie them down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's pretty good, eh? I mean, self-control, self-discipline, conciseness, we're getting there. Wonderful. Okay, now I'm inviting the panelists to cross-fertilize with each other. What do they agree with? What they don't agree with? Will they come to blows before the panel is over? Or will they embrace each other and say we were on the road to building a common movement? How is it going to unfold? This is another part of the test. So who wants to go first? And again, we're going to keep to the format of 2 or 3 minutes back and forth.
I mean, I can just start, I suppose.
Sure, of course.
You know, I think I will just start with Theo. We hear this a lot. We got to go back to the grassroots. But how? Why aren't we doing this? What is stopping us? You know, I can give examples again of the Kurdish movement. In Europe or in Kurdistan revolutionaries, they weren't working or this and that, but their full-time job was to go to the people and tell them that what they were living was wrong. You know, and give them hope and to give them courage and to organize them so they would effectively stand against what was being imposed on them. So what had happened was that, you know, they would not be allowed into houses. You know, if they were in cities, they had no one, they would sleep on the streets, you know, until the houses opened, actually had communication. So what I'm trying to say is I've been hearing this, like, not just from you, Theo, don't get me wrong, but in general, from the movements in Europe and everywhere else, like in Turkey too, because they've also become quite elitist. And this is why AKP is getting them all into one bag, you know. So why aren't we, like, what is lacking then? What's stopping us? What's stopping us reaching the grassroots? What are our handicaps? You know, this is because self-reflection is required here. You know, we can't just say capitalism is so strong. Let's leave them aside. We know what they are doing, but what are we not doing?
Thank you.
Shall I?
Sure.
Okay. So, as much as I admire the Kurdish example, and of course another big example that has inspired me throughout my life is a Zapatista example, these are really inspiring struggles, but they have some special conditions that are not present in Europe. In the societies that we operate, they are struggles fought under special conditions that are not present in the European and North American context with which most of us are familiar here. So we're talking about armed struggles that take place in a vacuum of power and have a very strong ethnic component. In order to have these three prerequisites here in Europe, we're talking about the Third World War. If there was a vacuum of power in Europe and we went back to ethnic identities. This is not to diminish these struggles. They're very important, but we cannot extract safe conclusions directly from one struggle to the other. The problem with Europe, this is not to disagree with you, this is to agree with you on a very, very important point that you made, that we need a story. We need a story that can go and reach the wide population. Like the leftists would call this a hegemonic plan, a hegemonic language, and empty signifiers that would unite people around common goals that would have many meanings for many different people. I'm all for a hegemonic plan, but not the hegemonic plan of the political communist and leftist parties, because we don't have a common identity to unite ourselves around, like the Zapatistas have, which have been traditionally repressed indigenous communities with similar lifestyles. And we don't, more or less the same less, we say, applies to the Kurdish people who unite around an ethnic identity, even if they question this ethnic identity and they are all for coexistence with the colliding with other ethnicities in the area. So we need identities. We need to build common identities. We need to ask again, who are these we? And in order to do that, we need to go back to square one. We need to privilege now human communication with our neighbor, not aiming for the institutions. Right now, I'm not anti-institution, anti-taking power, but right now we need to go back to square one.
I don't agree with some of the things.
I'm not a panelist.
But let's Vanda speak first.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, I should not participate in the exchange, but I can't help myself.
So let's be strict. Let's be
I
strict.
cannot help myself.
Why don't you self-discipline yourself, Dimitri? Let's Vanda speak, let all the panelists speak, and let you speak in the end.
Yeah, okay.
That would be the disciplined thing to do.
Good here.
It's heating
Okay.
up. It's heating up.
I don't know. I both agree and disagree, I guess. I agree, Theo, on your last point also that the Kurdish struggle has a characteristic that's not really translatable very easily to many European cities and so forth. Which is why I also think we need to look at the municipalist movements actually going on in Europe now. Not because I believe that they are social, ecological, or revolutionaries, or like specifically the way we would like to see it, perhaps. But as Dimitri said, I think the first day is we need to look at what is moving and catch on to what is moving that is similar in its approach to what we are looking for. And I agree with all this skepticism and fearness, perhaps, that if you look at the Spanish municipalist movement, the citizens' platforms, that they have tendencies that to fall into reformism or does not really manage to have a very inclusive approach. Still, I mean, the best way to assure that they fall into reformism is if revolutionaries keep out of them and refuse to be in dialogue and be part of those movements. So, yeah, that would be my response.
Yeah, I both agree and disagree as well, of course. So I do agree somehow, like, yeah, we have to always be back to grassroots and working on building the movement and working from the bottom up. I agree on that. But as well, I do think it's like you were saying, like Theo, that like we need to get the institutions working first. So if I understood you right, get the institutions working, like the way of working together and with the inequalities, and get the things working on the ground first, no, before going to try to seize the institutions, to understand the power relations, and like you were saying before in your questions, like how can we work in having equal decision making when you have the gender structures and race structures of inequalities, no, because it's difficult. So we need to kind of find ways of working along the lines with that, if I understand you a bit right, and as well that the institution have their limitations, etc. It's true, we have to work on that, but I think it's like, and we need to do this when we are ready, when we have the power analysis more in place. Of course, we need to work on the power analysis, etc. But I think we will be working on this while we are trying to do it, and we have to develop it, because when are we ready? I mean, we're never going to be ready. You know, like if we are going to be developing the utopia, and we can develop utopia when we have utopia, it's not, we need to do it walking, like creating it. And I think, so I think that's like, and you can see the examples of, like you were saying with the Kurdish, like the people were saying, well, you cannot leave the power, but like we need education first, blah, blah, blah. We have all these unequal structures with gender or whatever, you know, like that's what you're working with while you have your assemblies, and finding ways to have the women assemblies and etc. And that's what you don't wait with creating assemblies because you have inequalities between the genders. You are doing the assemblies and you work on how to solve it. No. So, and I think the same thing of like Svante's point, right, where we can try to seize the power institutions in the local municipalities and work on how, like, when they're slipping the wrong way, we have to get it on the better track, no? So I think point, and maybe I'll stop there. I had another point, and I just think, yeah, I'll take it next time, so it's not too long.
Thank you, everybody on the panel. Now, Theo censored me in good cause. I'm not a panelist, but I am part of the assembly. I'm going to speak.
Please speak.
I recognize myself.
Please speak. I invite you to speak.
And I'm going to say two things. First, I don't agree with you about the significance of the Zapatistas and the Kurdish movement. Of course, Nobody argues that we could replicate them. That's not the issue. But we can learn a hell of a lot from those movements.
Even like this.
And the movement that we can also learn from very deeply is what happened in the 1960s. We forgot the 1960s. And we have to learn what that movement was all about. That thrust of regenerating a new left. Some of you are young, but you're not stupid. You could learn from that history. And one of the cardinal principles of that movement in the 60s, which culminated in 1968, which is the year where the world came closest to a world revolution, by the way. One of the things that held that movement together was that people, the militants, the real activists, the people who understood the depth of change that was required, worked at it full time, to pick up Haven's point. They worked at it full time. They were not interested in academic careers. They were not interested in job security. They worked for pittance, and they worked for the movement full time. And that's how the movement was built. Built largely in the industrial northern countries, the countries that you and I are most familiar with. So that is another step from which we can learn a great deal. Let's have participation now from everybody else. Please.
To the point of identity, which the Kurdish movement, also the Salafista movement had an ethnic, like, which they had where we don't have this national question to use in a way. I think there are some identities we were in Europe also which we could use for struggle. Like in Spain, there are this national, in a way, movements who are also emancipatory. Or the youth, for example, who is all the time suffering domination by the old and settled, by the Iran bureaucracy and the woman for sure. There are two like really big groups in the society which are constantly under pressure and special oppression. So there are identities which would also work to build struggle on in our regions. I think.
Thank you. Somebody else. Maybe. Can you get this working there? Please.
First of all, I have to say something that I just see in the whole conference. I'm missing people from Arabic region, and I would love to have their opinion, proposals, and whatever in that ecological conference that you're running. Second thing is that since we become institutionalized, we are becoming a part of the system regarding the hierarchy elements. And I don't know if I understood well about what your points were about institutions in general. And then a third point that I have to ask or comment is that with regard, this I'm asking the all of you, do you think that real activism is fighting, meaning war? Because if we think that we are activists, okay, we are opposing, or we are struggling for something, or we are demonstrating, doing some parades and things that does not bring so much the solution or the revolution that we want to achieve. So, is that the solution is the solution one? This is, I want to ask everybody, and thank you.
I think I'm okay with Kevin's statement about working more. And the other subject, I think the difference between TOs and Swantes fight is maybe related with subject issue, I think. And for starting, of course, creating institutions are essential. But if you are thinking yourself or people like your identity as subjects, then you may, of course, not give priority for creating assemblies. But if you think the subject is you, but also the other people who are not even socialists, anarchists, social ecologists, and if you clearly understand that you can change the world, you cannot change the world without these people, then our priority must be, or should be, starting to build assembly-like organizations. And that's all. That's what should be done.
Thank you. Nikki. Nikki.
I do agree with you about going back to the grassroots. But that doesn't mean leaving out the big political issues. But I disagree with you that this is not the right moment to try to take power. I think that it never is the right moment to take power. I think you should create power from below. So many people talk about institutions. I'm not sure if I got clear all the times. I think we should deny the institutions that exist, but try to create and build our institutions from below again. And it's not only about the timing. I think this is it can never work to try from the official institutions of above trying to change things. Not now, not never. Now, the other thing about activists and full-time, job, or I like so much about your comment about it's us, but it's also society, people who are not involved in it, not think about these things. But all the tries and the efforts we should make would be not just that we change things, but we give power to society. That we don't want only to change the world into what we have in mind, but to try to do it all together. To give the opportunity and the power and create institutions with society, with all people, for to make a difference.
Yeah.
And yes, sometimes, at least in Greece, I've seen the attitude of many activists and people being part of organizations, many anarchist groups, looking towards other people who are not involved, like
derogatory manner.
Yeah, and this is a big mistake. We have to believe in the ability of everyone, not only the people who are already involved.
Please.
Hello. So quickly, I will make, I think, my own synthetic comments on the topics. I think on the one hand, we have this notion of a blueprint and preparing for the next, anticipating the next surge so that we can play a part in where it will go. Then we have spreading the gospel, which is, of course, very important. And I am in between the two, in my opinion, how we can fuse these two opinions. Then we have the entryism, a municipal entryism, in my opinion, approach. I'm borrowing the term, of course. And then I see a kind of a diffusion into pre-existing intersectional modes and trying to find some way of bringing them together. And so I do think it's very important now to have a very concise narrative that we can build, but also so that we can, in a reflective way, prepare ourselves. But in a more practical thing, which is then also what I want to talk about, is that as TRISE, or as communalists or together as an affinity of in common values, how we can prepare, because it's been 2 years, I guess, since this has happened, and lots of things in the world have been changing, and we need now, I think, to start reflecting on how we can create an axiomatic broad agreements on certain things to make a toolkit for accessing the resources necessary to build the consciousness. This is the part of the education. And then, of course, I think there needs to be a very efficient use of an online platform for us to continuously discuss, even when we are in different places of the world, in order to see how we can always be sharing our skills and in the projects that we will be doing. And I guess, and of course, this is now to start to build collaborations with many groups, specifically on the technological component, in my opinion. So I think the end of this year, by the New Year's, we should start to have achieved the steps, the roadmap now for us to go forward. And we still have some months to do that, but I would like in 2018 that we can start to build this family that we, I think, can all recognize within each other in its different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Yes, thank you very much for a very intriguing panel. I would like to just draw on a few things and see if I can put everything together like in 3 minutes. I would like to draw on the notion of intersectionality and / identity, which is the main issue of our times, more or less, and something that I think goes back to the debate between Theo and I don't know your name. Javier. Where is it that the ethnic identity can anchor people enough in order to actually have a different engagement with the public? And where is it in other places of the world where we have a much more mixed ethnic kind of pool, and how we can actually engage people in that particular way? Now, we also mentioned the term elitism, and I would like to just trigger the discussion a little bit more as to what type of elitism we're talking about, because this kind of self-other dichotomy, who is activist and who is not an activist, and how can we engage society, the ones that are on the outside of grassroots or not. It's something that has been ongoing since the 60s, really. We have a tendency as an identity kind of issue, all of us, to say, okay, we are doing all this together at that particular level of organization, and how can we engage the other? But the other always stays the other somehow. And this thing with who is full-time and who is part-time activist, I think that is also something that we should reflect upon with great honesty, because we all have our personal histories, we all have things that come along our way. Some of us can be full-time all the time, some of us cannot. And what does that mean in this kind of self-other dichotomy, and what is happening in this exchange, so to speak? Now, in terms of the grassroots versus institutionalization and vice versa, I think that this is again something that we know, okay, you can call that elitist again, but from sociological studies, we know that something that starts very impromptu and spontaneous at some point is going to get institutionalized. Whether we're talking about involvement with the municipality, or we're talking about what is happening in the kind of sedimentation of what we are doing. So I think that for me, the reflection is amongst these concepts. Since we have the intersectionality as a big issue, we should just give a little bit more time to reflect upon our own histories and who can involve the public outside the grassroots at what level and when, in order to have like a more kind of organic kind of flow with this, which is also part of what ecology is. And the other thing, because I'm new to this collective, I would also like to say that apart from the intersectionality, we should also just point at the first letter there, which is transnational. Which is also something quite new, right? And all this engagement with the media, the internet, everything that we're talking about, that's the other bit that we can reflect upon. And I don't even want to say we should reflect upon, because even the term transnational is, it's a conundrum in itself. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, I'm reacting to what Harvin said about need for a story. It's should be such that everyone would understand that what story we would have to tell to any people. And I think that the story of what is needed is quite simple, but somehow most activists are very shy to put it out. Namely, that these power structures and those people who are on top of those power structures, they are going to kill us all and also our future. That really, there is such an extreme repression on us all. And on the other hand, that it's not necessary, that there is ways of organizing society that we can have good life without these structures. So that really we are in great danger. That's somehow it's self-evident for us, but we are not articulating it as a very simple story.
Thank you. Panos.
I think we have a lot of stories, you say. It's like a storybook, anthology of stories. I think that the most important thing is participant in deciding what affects us. This should be the story. If we're going to talk to them about gender, about social ecology, or we have to do it this way or that way, in the end, the assemblies will decide by themselves. This is the idea. To persuade people to participate in what affects them, in decision making, in the resolution of the problems, in everything, and not wait for other people to do it. It needs time. Difficult. And an important thing, I think, in this participant process is what you said today. I've seen it a lot of times. Is she gave us an example that when she left this New Zealand, this Boston, there was this sexist movement. And intervention, he changed. So everybody is welcome, and through this participation in intervention, we change. So for me, I think the story is participation in, or I could say it in direct democracy.
Federico?
So, I am very pleased that I can see that there are no major disagreement, and even if our positions are different, for sure there are some echoes between all of us. So I think that this is something very, very, very important. I would like to say something to all the panel, that I don't see so many disagreements among you all, and I'm inviting you all to write together kind of a conclusion for the project, because I think that would be a quite nice overall view, and maybe it's also an interesting writing experience. And about the lesson from the 1968, I would love to be a full-time activist with all the problem of the dichotomy and so on, us, them, that we have to work on it. But if you're looking about the funding, they were not interested in money, and it was true at that time. But if we look on how they ended up in Italy, of course, at least, they ended up all in academia.
No,
all
not true.
I'm speaking about in Italy. They ended up all in academia. They ended up all in TV, mainly in Berlusconi's TV, and they ended up in the parliament, mainly in the Socialist Party and Berlusconi's party. So we have to learn from them that it's important to be full-time, but at the same time also to try to find a way to get funding somehow, because I don't want to end it up like that. And I think that we should find maybe a benchmark somehow. I don't like this word, but maybe we are speaking about we are ready to do that, we are not ready to do that, but maybe an important thing that is can be somehow maybe more or less objective, but I can put on the table, is the existence or not existence of a mass movement. We can say that the Zapatistas, they managed to build a critical mass in Chiapas. The Kurdish movement managed to build a critical mass in Kurdistan. Do we have our critical mass here in Europe? In Spain, in our city, is an open question that maybe we can use as a benchmark to move on or to wait and to move around and decide at which stage are we. And to conclude, as a general comment of these 3 days, I heard speak about dialectical naturalism so many times in these 3 days, and it has been a concept that has been so long neglected in social ecology, and for me it has been a shame, and I was writing and I was trying to work on it, and I've been very pleased to hear a presentation using it, and also many people interested in that. But I'm posing a question. How do we use dialectical naturalism in our daily life? In our daily life as an individual and also as an activist. So I'm putting the question, and if someone is interested to theorize some practice, to write some toolkit that can be useful to activists, please contact me, because I think that it is a very interesting project.
Please. Please.
Yes, to the part-time, full-time activism, Silvia Federici says that what we need is a self-reproducing movement.
Exactly.
That we are not self-funded by some other institutions, but we create in our struggles our way of reproducing ourselves. So in this way we create the spaces of autonomy, and we build solidarity among us, and we can continue our struggle in everyday life, consistent in what we are doing.
Brian.
I just want to reflect on the notes of Malin, actually. And I hope my notes are correct, actually, you know. But, I can remember once giving a lecture and then looking at the notes of one of the students, and it bore no resemblance to what I said, you know. So I hope my notes on what you said are true. But basically, what I've gathered from what you said, actually, you said, well, we're concerned with three things, really. With issues of protest, and you talked about, you know, rights to housing, ethnicity, protected nature. You know, you gave quite a list of all the different things we might be involved in. The other thing you stressed, we need to democratize and then involved in building up community projects or whatever. That's the gist of what I thought you said.
Yeah.
Okay. Which seems to me really quite valid. I just reviewed a book by John Clark called The Impossible Community, and about 25% of the book is slagging off dear old Murray Bookchin, and he used to be a student of Murray Bookchin, and you know, like that. But it's interesting what he suggests, old John Clark, is we got to focus on communities. You know, that basically communities. What he also says, actually, the whole idea of protest, you know, is out. You know, and anybody who involves in revolution, you know, they're just adapting the dominant kind of psychology of the oppressor. Basically, that's what he says. My feeling is there's two things always involved, and Dan sort of mentioned this. One, that we're involved in protest in all sorts of ways. We're involved in protest. In other words, we're involved in undermining what Bookchin called the legacy of domination in its varied forms. We're underdoing that. The other thing is a creative process of trying to build up communities and democratic assemblies like that. Now, I think those two things go together, basically, because it's through protests that you can hopefully start building up, you know, communities and things like that. It's not as if I mean, I'm a protester, I must admit, I'm not very creative. But I see these two things really going together. The protest is essential. It's essential to undermine you know, you mentioned the cracks in the cracks that may develop. We have to continue to be in protest with it, but linking the protest, you know. So in the one way, undermining the legacy of domination, at the same time building up a legacy of freedom, and that they're kind of dialectically interrelated, really. And from the one you go to the other, in a sense. You know, it's not as if there's two kinds of activists. You know, the activism brings these two things together. That's my thought.
Thank you.
I hope I got you right.
Yeah. Thank you for structuring my.
That's John Clark from the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, the one you are mentioning from OCA.
No.
Oh,
No.
it's not. That's not okay. It's not.
John.
Thanks. Yeah, just on a very humanistic, holistic level, wanted to make a plea for the importance of self-care. I agree with you, Havan, that our heads largely follow our hearts, and we must go where instinctively we think we have something to contribute to this call for action. But I also think we can become overwhelmed with the scale of suffering in the world and injustices, and you know, I've been guilty of that, and I see it in others as well. And I think so if we don't cultivate a sense of compassion for yourself and of recognizing kind of taking on what feels truly authentic to the local environment, then we're not going to be any meaningful use in a larger movement. Maybe that's stating the obvious, but I just haven't heard it mentioned today, and I think
Thank you. When we try to answer the question, how do we move forward? Don't we also have to identify what, not simply how, but what? What are the immediate objectives, the short-term objectives, as we undertake a movement building process within our respective cities? What do we try to say to our fellow citizens, our neighbors? What will be the common cause, the initial common cause that brings us together? Is it, for example, challenging private property? Is it creating nonprofit cooperative housing in various neighborhoods that are threatened by gentrification? Is it demanding free public transportation across the board and working out that kind of program, that kind of demand? Is it saying to the municipal government, listen, you are dealing with the money that comes from us, the citizens. What role do you think we should have in determining the priorities, the economic priorities of our city? We have a right to demand that. So what are the immediate and short-term and medium-term and long-term demands where we begin even from outside of the institutions to start challenging power and starting the process of dismantling it and decentralizing it? Let's have a bit of a discussion on that.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
Especially in relation to the previous debate that we made, and I'd like to direct a critique the way that both the Zapatista and the Kurdish movement is labeled here. I do not like the Eurocentric view that these movements are based purely on an ethnic base, and they are waging an ethnic movement, and this is why they are mass movement. You know, just because the Kurds are following, I mean, there are other movements in Kurdistan. There is a statist movement, which is led by Barzani and Talabani and the rest of it. And there is the Kurdish freedom movement. It may have started labeling it as Kurdistan is an interstate and international colony, but it has moved on to just say that it's an ethnic struggle. I find this very, very insufficient. And not just you, there are other people who also said it. And I think here what is important is not how this movement started, but what was. You know, like I explained that it began as a Marxist-Leninist movement when there wasn't a proletariat in Kurdistan, okay? Because Marxist-Leninism is based on the proletariat, but there wasn't a single proletariat in Kurdistan. So it's not about, you know, what its departure is. It's about the soul of it, you know? And I think there's a lot that can be seen from this. And I think it should be. Otherwise, we will see it impossible and to push ahead, you know. So that's what I wanted to say.
Good. Thank you. Now, maybe some of the panelists want to respond to
Can
what...
I make a comment, please?
Well, you're so far to the left. I mean, I thought that was the most left-wing person here, but you're obviously more left-wing than me. Please, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to comment.
Start, yes, okay. First of all, I think it's a nice image if we see our struggle every day. It has two fronts, two battles to fight. One is with the existent system. Either is the state, either is an abstract of ideas or something like this, either is capitalism. This is one battle we have to fight every day, and I will talk about this a bit more later. And the other struggle is the one we have to fight with the non-existent situation that we want to build. So we have a situation where we must find struggles and ways and fight the ideas, the institutions, the situations that happen every day through capitalism. And the other one is to build what we want to build. So this also can act, this we build can act as a bunker. So when something happens, perhaps generally and like a war situation, as Vilma said, who maybe is not our decision, it's the system's decision. So we have a small bunker to lie in, live at the moment, and perhaps if we win the war, institutionalize that bunker and make it a big house, a parliament, I don't know. At the first struggle, I think something that hasn't been heard all these 3 days, and it was very interesting to me that no one said that. And also it's a fight against capitalism, also helped us with the other battle. And it's something we must act tomorrow, and also links educational with the people, is consumerism. No one talked about consumerism. At the moment, we are all right now accomplishers and fencers of capitalism. Our everyday life is consistent of products and stuff that come from exploitation of raw materials from other countries, from exploitation of workers from other countries. Proletariats, which is a technical word. Proletariat means I don't have any kind of property of means of production. So there were proletarians in Kurdistan. It's a technical term. Anyway, so we must fight consumerism. If I don't stop buying from Lidl, I will owe to Germany all my life. When I ignite my car, I am an accomplice of Nigeria, of Shell taking Nigeria's oil. So we must also challenge our way of life and tell to the people and also to ourselves that if we want to change something, we must sacrifice away at least some aspects of our everyday life. And also this is something that helps educate people economically, showing them that link, that your life here has a link with the Chinese people at China, has a link with the black people in Nigeria. So you are not alone. Also some patriots, nationalists say, I don't want the other one came. Yes, but you are in their country. You might not step foot in, but you are in their country. You're taking their oil, you're taking their raw materials, you're exploiting their workers. So consumerism and all this, I think it's a very important thing. We must make it politically and push to the people.
Thank you. Now, is there anybody else who has not spoken from the assembly for the first time that wants to speak now? Therefore, I'm going to ask you.
If I can.
Sure. Future.
I would like to say I had in the last 2 years, I had a discussion with different people, activists from Europe. And the last 2 years, especially with the revolution in Rojava, I had a discussion with many activists or other people in Europe on the question what they or others could learn from the struggle in Kurdistan, in Rojava and Bakur, and the revolution. It's a very difficult question. I think I will not try to enlist what could be. I don't say in detail, this is important for you and this, you have to look, or people outside of the movement. But the question is not to go to the cores of the movement, to the basic elements, the way of working and approaching and organizing. There are the aspects which are interesting, and not so much, let's say, the general, more the discussion, but to understand the movement itself and the way it's organized, the way it discusses, the way it deals with the contradictions of society. There we have to look. This is a difficult discussion, but I think these points are meanwhile far away from the aspect of that the Kurdish identity is an oppressed identity. The movement has done, especially with the concept of democratic confederalism, quite big progress, and it has an important experience. And therefore, to look and how they deal with the issue of gender liberation, economic question, and let's say the relation, power question, how they deal with this, and the ecology, approach to ecology. And there are a lot of discussions going on, and there we have to look. And in the end, Kurdistan or the land of Zapatistas or other regions are part of this world, and we are always in interaction with each other. And Kurdistan has all the political perspective and ideology based on our experience and discussions, and the one of the world, of course. So we are all in interaction, and as much, and especially the last decades, impacts among each other of the people and movements is much stronger than in the years before.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak for the first time? Okay, now, I want to invite the panelists to tell us in a few minutes what they think are the points in common. What they think are the points in common from what we heard from other people in the assembly, amongst themselves. To what extent is there a commonality there? Or are there fundamental disagreements? There's nothing wrong with fundamental disagreements, but at least we should know them in order to continue to discuss them. So can you folks respond to that? It's a big question and a difficult question, but you know, we are talking about how do we move forward, and the how is also linked to the what. What do we move towards, etc. All of that has to be. It will help us, and I call upon some of the people who were in other panels and who are other speakers to help us articulate that. But I start with the panelists.
Yes.
You want a microphone?
I can pass it. I can take it.
This is fine. It's available to you.
I can. I can pass it to you first. I don't have it. Drop down to my mind. I need some time to think.
Yes, I would need to. But well, I don't think there are crucial disagreements. I mean, there are differences in focus and in like emphasis, and like what are we mature to do and so forth. But I think in terms, well, I could add, just to pick up on Federico's question there about the critical mass. Do we have a critical mass in many cities in Europe to like be part of a? Or I'm not sure how you meant. If it was just to engage in local elections, for me that's not really the main issue here. The main issue is the politics of social ecology is focused on recreating the political sphere and to like build direct democratic communities from below, and to foster this aspire for self-governance and to create this critical mass that could change society on a larger scale. Well, I think I very much would like to underline and emphasize what Having said about a plausible story that I think is very much lacking in Europe among popular social movements. Emphasize this existential commitment that it actually is to being a revolutionary, and we need to be straightforward with that. But in terms of objectives, I think it depends on local situation very much. What are the issues that concerns people? What are the issues that have the potentiality to? How can we link them to other issues and to link them to the question of democratization? Very much like Malin emphasized. So I'm not sure if I can say much more now. Yes?
In my first intervention, I said that I'm going to be provocative, and I think I managed to do that. So there is debate. There were many comments that were directed towards me, and some were like misrepresenting what I said. But I won't take the time now to clarify, because I have to prove that apart from being provocative, I can also be conciliatory. Okay, and understand the need of Dimitris, who is the facilitator, to end on a positive and on a positive note this congress, this conference. So I'm going to stand on the issue of community building, which has cropped up in, especially in Malin's intervention, and the need to for internal democratization, the need to acknowledge in an intersectional way the oppressions within and without the movements that was brought up, I mean, also by Elizabeth, sorry. Also, there was a great element of building our own story as movements, a story that can be accessible to a majority of people, and also fighting our internal contradictions, which would, in a sense, help fortify our institutions before we go forward to make these institutions widespread. That's all I'm going to say for now, because I don't want to go back to the contradictions. Okay.
Okay. I think struggles throughout time, throughout the struggle of humanity, has proved. I think the struggles throughout time has what it has done is it has shown the different aspects of the oppression, exploitation, and the enslavement that not just humanity, but the nature and the balance between individual, society, and the nature has been broken down. So all of our struggles, whether it's feminist struggle, whether it's struggles for, people's struggles, or struggles of workers, or struggles during the time of feudal times, or whatever the class name it took over the 5,000 years, what it has done is it has made this issue visible, and it has added to the theory of making this issue of enslavement, domination, statehood, whatever, visible. So I think that this is why I think Öcalan is naming 21st century the century of hope. There is now so much of it out there that we know. So therefore we know that our story is the same story, you know, whether it's the Kurds, whether it's the Zapatistas, whether it's the Greeks, you know. So it's the same actually story of exploitation, of monopolization of the surplus, of manipulation, and etc. So I think this is out. I think the second thing we can be meet common grounds at is that this is not just any other time. This is the time, you know, just like before the First World War, where there was an opening, you know, for the Soviets to come up, you know, for different people's movements, socialist movements, etc. coming up. And there again, why this is the time, we have learned a lot from all these struggles, and we know now better than then what to do and what not to do. And we know that these kind of periods don't come all the time. So we need to do it now, you know. And when I say now, I don't just mean this year. You know, it's a period that is continuing. So I think this is also very important to know. And I think the third thing is we cannot reform the state civilization. We cannot reform capitalism or patriarchy. There's no reform, you know. During the Cold War, there were welfare states, you know, Scandinavia was more democratic. Germany was, I don't know what, because of two parts and stuff. But now we're seeing, it's not only Kurdistan, all around the world, the rights are being taken back. So therefore, what we need to do, including self-defense, that includes intellectual work very much. So I'm not talking about a story like a gospel. On the contrary, you know, our story is so much more real than any mythological story that can be made, you know. So therefore, we need new tools, you know. Like, for example, in general, the Kurdish movement, but in the Hamburg conference that we've been doing, what we're trying to do is bring movements together under the name of working groups. Let's say education, you know. Like, why should we continue to go to the education system of capitalist modernity? Do we need to have kindergartens, primary schools, and I don't know what? And does it have to be so separate from nature, from society, and etc.? So this system comes in as a parcel. You know, we can't say we'll continue to do this, but we will not do this. You know, it comes as a part and parcel of things. So we are, as the Kurdish freedom movement, what we are trying to do is establish within our community, not with the Turkish state, within the Kurdish community, we are trying to organize the most oppressed, you know, like the woman. She's oppressed by everybody, you know, like the youth, you know, like the different beliefs that are being tried to be like eliminated, disintegrated, or other peoples, like Assyrians, Armenians. You know, these are not, we're not just talking about ethnicities, we're talking about a memory of the past, you know. So therefore, you know, to bring all this wonderful intellectual work that has been done not only in Europe, because we need to pick and choose, not all of it is good. I mean, as a movement, we criticize this excessive rationalism, you know, and learn from indigenous societies at the same time, and create tools that can be dynamic, and they can, you know, they can strengthen this tendency towards freedom. And by organizing all the oppressed, bringing them together in assemblies where they come organized, you know, and they battle it out. I don't mean it with guns or whatever, but you know, they transform themselves in those meetings and in their where they belong to, in their communes. So time is the right time.
Does anybody dare add anything to that?
We are the wings of history. Let's fly.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Mali?
Yeah. Yes, difficult to add to that, but I should speak up as well, like you all should. I will both take the question you said first, like what's the common, but I will go off a little bit and just on the question you asked before about like what's our short terms, what's our next steps, what's going on right now, you know? And I think first, like what I hear from us here, like something in common that a lot of us talk about, both like what's our strategies to move forward, no? Like, and what do we believe in? What's our heart? Because if we're going to fight for something, we need to believe in it and be ready to put a lot of energy into it, no? So you need to feel for it, you know? Like, and all this, like we have a vision, but we have to act in the here and now, no? Like we need to start where we are, where we live, and where we are in your life. And I think that's really, all of us are looking into this, and myself is really looking into this as well. I'm just sharing, I would like to share a little bit from what I'm thinking, and I would like you to maybe share with each other later on, like what I'm thinking of, like, yeah, how to start this. For me, is like, I think we just need to start doing things and reevaluating, because we can't be finding the perfect, you know, because we will never start doing things. We really need to start doing things, and then of course we step back and reflect, go back and do again. But yeah, we need to do. I really encourage us to think and do and think, because if we don't put it in practice, it never happens. Like, we're really stressing. And what I'm thinking, like, I live in my neighborhood. It's one of the poorest neighborhood in Gothenburg. And what I'm thinking, we're starting a network of community organizations and people living in the area, and starting to get things together, a network. And I think what I would like to do is, one of the questions starting off with, the resources should be, we should have power over them. So start pushing for a participatory budgeting process. And at the same time, pushing for that, as well, talking to people, doing all this community work, knocking on doors, talking to people, organizations. What are the problems and how can we solve them, you know? So we can make a plan in your community. So you can both push for the power over the resources, get the demands that you want to change, and start working as well with working groups, start working with the issues straight on, you know? So I think that's something, start building, like you were saying. I think Dimitri putting it, so like you've been talking about, you're both creating your own power base in community and with social movements, but at the same time you're challenging the institutions. So like you're both having our power base in our network and people and the community organization and challenging the institutions, but we will still always keep on the base, challenging to get the power, no? That's something that I think I will start doing, and as well, like, we have a network of different organizations in our city, and we will start sharing like tools on how to organize and how to win our fights. And that's a way of strengthening the movements and getting together. So yeah, just sharing some of my, from what I'm thinking of things. I hope that you can talk to other people when you go out and have a drink. So where are you at? What are you involved in? What are you thinking of? What you're dreaming on, or what do you want to do? So you can share this, and we can reflect and help each other moving forward and to act and encourage each other to act.
Thank you, Mara. and that on that very important two-part response to this this theme, this panel, may I have your permission to call a glorious conclusion to a wonderful conference.
So tomorrow at Osman here in place